The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Carnegie and also Bishop Doc Loomis. And welcome, gentlemen. Good to have you with us once again.
Thank you, Ben.
Good morning.
Let's get started with our program today with an article comes out of the Detroit News, and it is about the Methodist surprise in Portland. Mark Tooley, writing this article, says America's third largest religious body voted last week to quit the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, a Washington-based interfaith abortion rights lobby that the United Methodist Church helped to found in 1973. Methodists also voted to delete the church's 40-year-old resolution affirming Roe v. Wade. When United Methodism organized what was then called the Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights in the wake of Roe v. Wade, the church was still culturally and politically influential with about 10 million members. It was and is the largest mainline Protestant denomination. Liberal mainline Protestant denominations like the Methodists helped create the moral ethos facilitating abortion rights. They portrayed the pro-life cause as Catholic, and RCRC was founded partly to counter the Catholic Church's pro-life advocacy. This has been an issue that's come up, I think, in every annual conference that I've been a part of now for the last 9, and then a lay person before that. So a vote to try to for a resolution to remove ourselves from this RCRC. And our friend Paul Stallsworth has usually been the author of that. This is frankly, I was surprised that not only that it came up, because it usually doesn't even come up at General Conference, but it came up and then was affirmed to get out of the RCRC, which has been the desire of a growing number of Methodists. Do you see this in reading these articles, guys? Do you see this as a sea change, or is this, again, a result of the changing demography of the Methodist Church and churches in general? Doc, I know that you study the church from the Southern Hemisphere a lot, and this is a large influence here.
Yes, it's a huge influence. This is very much like what we witnessed in our own denomination, the Anglican Church. The decline of the Western Church numerically has been significant in Methodism and in Anglicanism. And at the same time, the growth of the Church of the South has been really unparalleled in Christendom. The growth of Roman Catholics, Pentecostals, the Methodists, and of course the Anglicans. So that has significantly shifted the nature of the attendees at these every 4-year,
Sure.
10-year, kind of like our Lambeth. It's changed. So what happened in the Anglican Church was a bunch of Southern bishops began coming to Lambeth Palace every 10 years, and significant changes caused them to all but break the church up. The Episcopal Church, before that could happen, then just kind of decided to go off and do its own thing. This is what's going to happen in Methodism. There's going to be a group in Methodism that is going to want to hold on to the ground that they've already gained. That would be their way of looking at it. And in order to do that, they're going to have to mitose out of Methodism and become the ununited Methodist Church, I guess. Yes, demography, big deal.
Yeah. Again, it says about United Methodist Women and United Methodist Board of Church and Society, the church's Washington lobby, are now required to quit this group. You've been working in this field for a long time, Robert. This is a major event for?
No, this is significant. Absolutely. You know, it's interesting when you go back and you look at the history of the mainline church's relationship with Roe v. Wade, because that's a very important thing that they just did. Not only that they're coming out of these two organizations, but that
they removed their
Resolution.
They removed the resolution in support of Roe v. Wade. Now, if you'll recall, back at that time, the mainline denominations embraced this. The Southern Baptists were very pro-abortion. The majority, I mean, as an organization. And this was back in the 70s. And it has taken, the pro-life movement within the church, which has been within the Protestant church, let's put it that way, drove a stake in the ground back then and said, we do not recognize Roe v. Wade as just law. That it was a poorly written decision, and they have said we will not accept it, and started the process of arguing against it and continuing to attack it and to undermine it. And so that was in the 70s, and it's continued up to today. And along about the mid-'80s is when the Baptists flipped. They switched and became pro-life. And maybe even a little early. I mean, it was starting, the snowball was starting to roll down the hill. And the education outreach to younger people, you talk about demographics, we've now have a generation that's come up in this transition. And they've been, they've seen both sides of the argument. And I believe that's part of this as well. In the Methodist Church, there's a younger demographic that's, as well as the Southern demographic. But here at home, there are those that are saying, no, we just, and plus layer on top of that all this stuff that's been going on with Planned Parenthood and all the selling of baby parts and all of that. And it's just like people are saying, enough is enough.
The article also says that the departure also perhaps confirms that overall public opinion, religious and not, especially by the young, is shifting subtly toward pro-life. Many may not politically identify with pro-life advocacy, but they don't resonate with the RCRC style of unalloyed abortion activism. And this is, I think, part of it as well. And I wonder if you mentioned about among the young, it may reveal yet another challenge for churches too, is the acceptance of unmarried children being born to unmarried moms.
Right.
And that's become culturally more accepted now. So I wonder if that's influencing a pro-life stance and revealing yet another challenge for the church.
There are lots of influences going on. I think the Southern one probably is one of the biggest ones
Southern
within
one
the Methodist Church.
It's created the vote.
Right,
that
exactly.
5
I think
million
that's
new adherents.
Yeah, exactly. That's huge. But I think there is a change we're seeing here, that is happening as well. So, it's going to be interesting to watch this move forward, because this is all based on that concept that basically men are non-essential except for,
Yeah, I think what if I hear what you're saying, Ben, part of this is the result of a nanny state taking over not just the acceptance in our churches of unmarried moms and such as that, but the idea that when we were growing up in the 50s, if a woman got pregnant and she wasn't married, that was a death sentence to her in many ways. She usually went off somewhere to have the baby.
That's right.
Baby might have been given away. Abortion comes along. Abortion becomes a viable alternative. Now there's really not any stigma attached, one. And two, there is a daddy, the state, that can provide what's really necessary for most moms to raise a kid in a single family. So I think part of what's going on in the minds of the young adults is they're saying, well, why would you kill a child? There's all sorts of benefits and ways to do this.
Yes. So again, our challenge in churches now is also to be more pro-marriage. Is to look at that pro-family, doing some things like you're doing now.
What we're doing in the pregnancy center, that's right, is we're addressing the male as well as the female aspects of being a family, and that it takes both to do this. And I mean, look, there are plenty of single women who have raised children well and all of that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to speak. But the original design, that doesn't change the standard. The standard that God established was that you need a mother and a father to be involved in the lives of their children, and that is the foundation of society. And when you say that one is redundant, either or, then you're distorting the reality.
But to go back to an earlier point there too, the pushback from the liberal side of the churches, period, not just the Methodist Church, is schism. I mean, it really is probably going to be to pull out and to have another kind of arrangement altogether, right? I mean, I think a lot of Methodists see that that's coming.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there's Methodists who are wonderful Orthodox people who could actually see themselves being the ones to step away. I mean, I think that's the way it was. That's the way it was for Anglicans, by example, Lutherans, Presbyterians. The more Orthodox group has always said, well, I think we need to maintain our orthodoxy, so we're going to go do this thing over here, right? That's
correct.
Kind of how schism tends to go. In this particular case, it's interesting because the main body of the church is moving toward orthodoxy.
Yes.
And so it will probably jettison a heterodox group.
Right.
That's the way it's looking right now, which is different. If you'd asked me this 10 years ago, I would have said there's an Orthodox remnant in Methodism that will probably have to be its own thing.
So it's not only the issues of gay marriage and gay rights, but also now of reproductive choice here could coalesce in this in a heterodox group.
That's right.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and I'm Ben Ball along with Reverend Robert Cornigan and Bishop Doc Loomis. And our next article we want to take a look at is from the News and Observer, and this one is about the headline is Black Pastors Rally Support for HB2 saying LGBT rights are not civil rights. Written by Craig Jarvis. About 40 preachers rallied on the state capitol grounds on Tuesday to take offense at comparing the fight for LGBT protections to the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The idea for the rally crystallized after Clarence Henderson, one of the students who participated in the sit-ins at the Woolworth's Diner in Greensboro in 1960, wrote an op-ed piece in last week's Charlotte Observer saying that it was a gross exaggeration to compare the two issues. U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch, she's also from North Carolina, announcing a lawsuit against North Carolina over the new law, described the controversy as part of an arc of history related to discrimination in all its forms. The gentleman from the Upper Room Christian Academy in Raleigh, and I'm not going to pretend to pronounce his name, he says, "We are here to debunk and dispel the fallacious ideologies that many have attached to HB2, which is simply common sense. Our President and our Attorney General have made some inflammatory comments that are erroneous at best." All right, this is wading into the HB2 issue one more time. Now, here is something, though. This is not a new argument. There have been other African Americans who have said that issues surrounding LGBT or just gay rights issues generally, that it's unfair to equate what they may experience with what blacks experienced in the history of the U.S., from slavery to freedom to Jim Crow to civil rights legislation and the fights and the marches and the battles. Others have said, no, it very much is the same. It's about equality, and it's about equal access, etc. Guys, what do you think about this particular event, these pastors coming together? Robert?
Well, I'm sympathetic with their position as a Christian, because as Christian brothers and pastors, because the argument here is one about the difference between objective truth and subjective truth. Are they the same thing?
Right. Okay.
And so what we're seeing is that historically the civil rights movement was based on an objective truth. And that means that truth corresponds to its object or to reality. It's linked to a real time and space, physical being, such as
Right.
color of your skin,
Right.
or something that you can't. It doesn't change based on how you feel about it. I mean, you can go in and try to change if you're fair-skinned and you want to be brown-skinned, then you can go out in the sun, like many people do around here, and become brown-skinned for some of them. But you're not changing the basic essence
You're not
of who
changing
that
your
physical
DNA.
essence. That's right. So that's objective truth. Truth corresponds to reality. Subjective truth is a different thing altogether. Subjective truth is based on feelings, emotions, experiences, things
Or
like
opinion.
that. And the objective truth really doesn't change because it's tied to an object. Subjective truth is tied to an idea or a thought or a feeling that do change. These things do change. We tend to use other terms. We tend to use relativism and absolutism, and this is where it goes into philosophy. We won't get into it, but so here we have someone who has a subjective truth trying to claim it's an objective truth. In this case, we have black pastors who are saying you're trying to make this subjective feeling that you have
Of gender identity, gender expression.
exactly, and they're two different things. You're making a category mistake. They're
Right.
two different kinds of truth. Subjective truth, it's a truth, but it can change.
Right.
I mean, it's subjective. Objective doesn't change. And so here's where the big divide is happening. It's really confusing because now they're saying, there are lots of people that say this, that your feelings actually can be objectified.
Right.
And I'm sorry.
Wow.
They can't. They can't be.
Any listener that wants to send in $20, I will send you a certificate for 3 continuing education units for that training on truth. That was awesome. I feel better educated right now.
Yeah.
Wow. The challenge is that I agree with what you said to a point. But the reality is that the black experience in this country is a subjective truth. It begins there. It never begins with the color of skin. It begins with what people believe about African Americans, right?
What other people believe.
What in our case, what white Americans believed about African Americans, what
Oh, yeah.
Nazis believed about Jews.
Well, they were wrong.
Yes.
But it wasn't the fact that they were black or white. It was the fact that a group of people, in this case a race of people, was thought to be subhuman, to just sum it all up parenthetically,
Or inferior.
or inferior in some way. And so it really all begins, and I think that's what the argument, the LGBT argument right now is, that same thing. You've got us wrong. I know, I understand the objective part isn't there. They're still biologically what they were made to be when they were born, and I get that. But what they're saying is you've got our group wrong, and we're being wronged.
Right. We're victims.
We're victims of what you think about us.
Right. Right.
That's where the victimization seems to be for most of the LGBT people. You're thinking wrongly about us.
Well, is history judged that correctly? Is there a truth there?
Is there truth
In that idea? I mean, they're basing that argument that civil rights is that civil rights is that people think wrongly about someone else.
Well, Janet Lynch summarized it at the end of our article today and said, where there are people who feel victimized and are indeed victimized and made to feel vulnerable simply because of a physical characteristic over which they have no control, that is exactly what the civil rights laws are meant to cover. And I get that. That goes back to Robert's argument. It is a physical characteristic. I'm black. I'm white. That is a physical characteristic. So actually, Janet Lynch's statement has really nothing to do with this.
Loretta Lynch.
Right? Yeah. This is or Laura Lynch, Janet Lynch, Laura Lynch. It is actually a subjective truth, subjective.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you think about the whole, and I mentioned it last week about the mind, body, soul connection.
Right.
As Christians, how do we put this together? Is our physicality associated in some way with our spirituality? Is there a like when Christ became man and he was 100% man and 100% divine, we call that the hypostatic union of these two natures that came together and that they coexist in that and to this day. And when he died, that corruptible body became incorruptible. And in its incorruptibility, is his physicality now different? What are the differences between his physicality before and his physicality now? And is it something that gender plays a role in this? Is he genderless now? Does he have? Well, I'm using a male pronoun for him. I mean, this is so the eternal. There is a link between our physicality and our spiritual nature, and we're going to find, in the redemption, then when the redemption is complete, we get these bodies. What would we say? Supersized
or incorruptible.
Incorruptible, exactly.
Right.
And so you can't just say it doesn't matter whether you're born male or female. You can be whatever you want to be intellectually. And that's and today in psychiatry, that's a pathology. When you reject your physical nature, they treat that as a problem. It's a bug. It's not a feature. So, here we have an attorney general and a president and others trying to step into something that is much more complicated than what they're claiming it to be. They're just seeing it from a political perspective, sociological perspective, not from a theological or any other perspective. So that's all I've got to say about it.
If this section airs and is not replaced by a Sandy Patty tune, I'm going to be really surprised. Dick Ray, if you're out there, let me know on Sunday if this airs in the morning.
Right. Well, but the idea of these pastors coming together expresses a frustration, I think, that is shared by a number of people, that a mountain has been made out of a molehill, that this is the solution to a problem that may really not exist. And they have said that this has gone much farther than anybody thought that this argument would go, because it's not like our argument was in the 60s. That's what they're saying. But anyway, and Barry Saunders' op-ed piece in the News Observer today is interesting too, because he also says that they are acting as if there's some sort of payment due because of what they went through, and so he wants to know where to cash his check. So.
Yeah, this is a little bit of stolen valor, really, if you think about it in those terms.
More to come on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. And welcome back to Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Lewis and Reverend Robert Cornegie. And we're talking about, in this segment here, it's an article after a decision was made to pursue the death penalty against the Charleston shooter. The headline in the Huffington Post politics section is called "Bernie Sanders Opposes Death Penalty for Dylan Roof." And it's written by, let me see who it's written by here, Sam Stein. Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont opposes the Justice Department's decision to seek the death penalty in the case of Dylan Roof, the accused killer of 9 parishioners at a church in South Carolina last year. The article goes on to say the Democrat presidential candidate has long been an opponent of capital punishment, arguing that it doesn't fit with America's moral values or deter crime. And though the circumstances of the roof case have been prompted cries for severe punishment, his campaign reiterated his position in an email to the Huffington Post. Attorney General Loretta Lynch announced on Tuesday that the Justice Department would seek the death penalty in the roof case, following a rigorous review process to thoroughly consider all relevant factual and legal issues, according to the text of her release. Now, again, this is the federal case against him. The state case has already said they would pursue the death penalty. So probably the federal case will be heard first at some point in time. Usually they go first. What do you find any interest in this? I think as Christians, I look at this as Bernie Sanders that says, I oppose the death penalty, period. And there are many Christians that do. They oppose the death penalty in all cases. And then they get this one. Then they get a case like this. And it does test where someone's going to feel on that. So, but Bernie says, I say that he's taking an orthodox position. I mean, he's saying this is in all cases. That means all cases. What do you think, Robert?
You know, there are a lot of people opposed to the death penalty for a lot of different reasons. Some believe it's that pacifism is, a part of their faith heritage. And
we'll take Mark's position.
We'll take Mark's position, although he's not here to defend it.
Yeah.
But, where death and the use of violence is a sin, and that the state using violence against a criminal or someone would be as bad, would be repeating the sin of the murderer to murder the murderer. And
Right.
so, they get in a moral position on that. Then there are others that are opposed to the death penalty because there have been found to be cases where people have been sentenced to death and they were actually innocent
Right.
of the crime. They didn't do it. And now with we've gotten DNA and all of that, and we're finding that there genuinely are poorly prosecuted situation.
And there are any number of states that have suspended any executions, but they still may have death penalty on the books.
Yeah, and in fact, we have one pharmaceutical company now that has said, our drugs cannot be used in
taking a corporate stand there.
Taking a position on it. So it's it's all over the place. And to me as a Christian, who is the final judge of my life? Is it the guy with the robe on? Other than Doc.
In the canary shirt.
In the canary shirt, that's right. But he does have his mitre on, so
that's
that
good.
looks good. I really like that. But I lost my train of thought completely on that one. You succeeded in that. The ultimate judge is God.
Right.
And that when we pass from this life into the afterlife, there is this moment coming when we will have to stand before the judge. And that is the one that we should be fear and trembling about, if in these kind of cases. So to Bernie's position, he doesn't believe that. He doesn't believe there's an afterlife, that there's a judge. He's an atheist. He's taken that position. He's very clear on that. And so the punishment has to be here. It has to be on this side of life rather than into the other side. And so what else do you think? You just leave them in jail till they rot. I mean, that's basically what he's saying. And so you're actually extending the anguish. And but he doesn't see that what's going to happen on the other side is really where the eternal destiny.
The article goes on to say is that several prominent Republican South Carolina officials praised Lynch's announcement, including Senator Tim Scott and Representative Trey Gowdy. Less clear, however, was how Democrats would approach the debate, considering the horrific nature of the incident and the national outrage it sparked. President Barack Obama has called capital punishment deeply troubling, but somehow he can rationalize. There are certain crimes that are so beyond the pale that I can understand society's need to express its outrage, he told the Marshall Project in 2015. Democrat presidential frontrunner Hillary Clinton likewise said she supports the death penalty in certain egregious cases. Aides to Clinton did not respond to requests for comments on the Roof case. You see this, Doc, though, as being trying to have it both ways for some, and whereas others will support the death penalty and can say they can back it with religious argument.
Well, here's what I like about what Sanders has done. He's taken a position.
Yeah.
It just happens to be my position too. I'm more like Mark in that regard. I don't like the idea of us taking human life, but it's always interesting when you get into conversations about the death penalty that it's that we're paying back a member of our society for something they've done to us, but we don't have these same conversations about war. In other words, if somebody from another society comes and blows up my building in New York or shoots my son in the in Flanders Field or whatever, most of these people have absolutely no issue whatsoever with killing them back. And yet, for a lot of religious people, we have a really hard time with the killing one of our own, the one in our own society. Does that make sense?
Right.
And so in this regard, what I like, you see, if Bernie Sanders was consistent that we don't ever pay back death with death, then he would be totally anti-war. He would dismantle. He wouldn't even allow us to shoot back. Wouldn't that be the logical end of that argument?
He would take the guns away from the police.
That would be the German pietist opinion.
That would be exactly what it would be. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where I come to a hard part. You know, I had a gun once upon a time. I know a lot of guys that have guns now, and I like the fact that they're killing people back who would like to kill me. But I don't actually agree, as a part of our society, that we have control over and we all agree to live in. I don't actually think that we, as a society, should be killing this kid.
So some would make the argument certainly on the Christian side is that we've given up. We've given up on this person on their soul. Well,
yeah. I mean, biblically, is there a place where God says, yeah, you do that? You know, that's part of the debate, isn't it? That's been debated for centuries.
Where we have the word smite.
Yeah.
That's right.
And, you know, where you talk about that, the church was given the sword of the Spirit, the state or the civil government was given the sword of iron to protect and to punish, protect the innocent, punish the wicked. And so, you know, you have to say, was that just an Old Testament thing that no longer applies, or is that something that that applies today? That you know, that society. I mean, if we were all Christians, all angels, you know, that's one of the famous quotes. If everybody were angels, but they're not. And so, how do you do it? And if you just put them away for life, cage them for life. Then there are consequences to that as well. I mean, that's a death sentence. It's just down the road.
Right.
And
the slow, expensive one.
And you know, Bernie's position is not with opportunity for parole. I mean, you know, that's not going to go that way with this guy. If he's not served the death penalty, then he will be, you know, an expense that we will continue to have. Now, is that a justified expense for the rest of his life?
I actually like what you said, Ben, about, you know, what's the Christian position on this, because the reality is, I don't know what the numbers are, but it used to be like 30% of people that go to prison find Jesus. I mean, they actually repent for their sins, and they have an opportunity, like the thief on the cross, to go on and do. So when we smite somebody right off the bat, do we take away that option? I think that's a good point.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Speaking of Janet, who actually was Attorney General, Janet Reno, said she said that she personally opposed the death penalty, but she could enforce the law. Right? That seems to be a position that is popular in some circles, although the current administration doesn't seem to be taking that position. They're just saying that the egregiousness, the level of the crime, is what triggers my acceptability.
Well, and again, this is that whole hate crime thing that's been layered into this argument, you know, that it's gone from just being a crime
right.
to being a hate crime. And so that complicates the whole process as well.
Well, if you're a politician, what you say is, I oppose the death penalty except in egregious cases. That's what I think either Obama or Clinton, one of them said.
He can rationalize.
Maybe they both said it. Okay, so
Right.
egregious. So what you're saying is, you can believe whatever you want to believe about me because you don't know where that line is.
Exactly.
The thing that's interesting that you've mentioned is the hate crime thing. Because we used to think the death penalty was, if somebody hit somebody with their car going down the street, we probably didn't kill them. We have categories. But if somebody walked into a school and shot 20 kids dead, we should kill them. But now the thing that makes the big difference is whether or not it was a hate crime. We need to kill people who are practicing hate crimes. That's ironic at the least.
Yeah.
That's become our measure. It's not how many or in what manner or with.
Because we really hate that.
Yes.
Yes. That's
Well,
right. I mean,
yeah.
that's what we're saying.
That's exactly
And,
it.
Yeah.
and we project on them what they were thinking at that time. We're killing them because of what they thought, not what they did.
Subjective truth.
There you go.
More to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And welcome back to Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegy and Bishop Doc Loomis. In our final segment today, we are looking at an article that was in the Deseret News National called What Keeps Believers from Talking About Faith in Public. After giving a little story about this, it goes into saying, fear of how other people will respond to religious discussion guides or rather halts many believers' attempts to bring up their faith with family, friends, or strangers. When they sense someone disagrees with them about religion, nearly 1 in 4 U.S. Christians avoid the subject altogether, according to a new survey from Pew Research Center. These findings likely satisfy those who think faith has no place in polite conversation, but religious leaders and scholars say we shouldn't celebrate when a first date, holiday dinner, or phone call passes with no mention of religion. Discussions about belief in God, prayer, and theology play an important role in society, helping people venture beyond their comfort zones and gain new understandings. Now, a couple other surveys are also mentioned too, but let's start with that. Robert, you have studied apologetics, talking about defending your faith. Really, this is what this is all about.
Exactly.
But just even mentioning it, though, people do have a hard time.
Yeah, well, apologetics is an aspect of evangelism. It's just a tool in the evangelism toolbox, is what it is. There are lots of other tools in there, and one of them is demonstrating God's love. I mean, that you can do that evangelistically, if you will.
Evangelistically? Okay, all right.
That's the old evangelist thing when they tell you how many people got saved. There were 700 people there and 900 came forward.
That's right.
That's evangelistically speaking.
Yeah, very elastic.
But the first one is demonstrating God's love. That's the mercy of God. People need to feel God's love. We talk about that an empty stomach. In Africa, they say an empty stomach has no ears.
Right.
And so you have to, you're kind of doing pre-evangelism, if you will, to a degree. You're preparing the soil. You're preparing their hearts. And then it's so that's the demonstration. Then there's the declaration of the gospel, which is usually the last component. The one in between it is defending the faith. Because, and we used to call it the two hands of the gospel. Now we need a third hand, right? Because so many people don't. It used to be that there was this kind of in our culture that most people kind of understood the basics of Christianity, but now they don't.
Right.
They have no idea, and so you have to.
Not even in church.
Yeah,
really.
and so you have to be able to talk about what Christianity, what that whole thing is all about, and what God is up to, and what He's doing, and you can say that's declaring the gospel, and part of it is, but then you need to know how to present the gospel. So there are 3 parts of it, basically, the way I break it out. So it's demonstrate, defend, and declare the gospel, and
but
there
why?
are tools for that.
Right, but why is it so hard for so many people to bring it up?
Because they really don't know how to do. They don't know. They know what they believe. They don't know why they believe it. And so when they get into a discussion, and people start asking questions, they have, people have their doubts, and so when they start expressing their doubts, they don't know how. They haven't been taught how to talk about that there really is a reasonableness to our faith, that there's evidence that we can use in the process. You're not going to argue anybody into the kingdom. It's not an intellectual discussion.
Right.
We don't come to Christ generally intellectually. It's a volitional, it's a will. I choose to believe, help me in my unbelief, kind of situation.
Doc, what do you think?
I think the greatest evangelist in history was probably blind Bartimaeus, who knew nothing, had never attended a class, and yet was able to succinctly say, I really don't know anything about what just happened, but I know I was blind and now I can see. And I think the reason that people don't share their faith is because they haven't a testimony to share. If you and I go to a restaurant after this thing today, and a waitress walks up to us and says, and I say, how are you doing? And she says, well, I'm actually not doing very well today, but thanks for asking. My husband is a real piece of God's handiwork, and my hours got cut back, and I've got to go into hospital because I got this little cancerous thing on my nose.
But how's the meatloaf?
Yeah, but if I look at that same waitress and I say, well, I want to tell you something. There was a time in my life when I was suffering with my spouse, and we really weren't getting along very well. But I met a fellow who helped me with that, and I can tell you about him. She's all ears, because the thing that the church has forgotten is that everybody out there has got brokenness. Everybody out there has fallen short. Everybody out there has got a bad marriage, has got an addiction, has got a financial worry or something. And the idea, when I share my faith, that's where I start. I start where the brokenness is. And because I am the most broken person I know, and the Lord did a work, that's called my testimony. And if I have a testimony to share, then that's different than sharing the intellectual side or even the creedal side of my faith. I'm just sharing hope with somebody. I'm just saying, I was busted up like you are, and now I'm good, and I would be willing to help you to get good by introducing you to my friend Jesus. I would love to do that. The reason that people don't do that is because they don't have a testimony. And the challenge is the church is not in the testimony business. If the church would get back into the testimony business, that is the business of helping people to receive often miraculous life changes, or at least transformational changes in their marriages, in their finance, in their cancers, then there would be more people that would have something to say and the willingness to say it. Bartimaeus had no reason to promote Jesus, and yet he did, because he was transformed. Something happened to him. And so I don't agree with the idea that the reason the church doesn't do it is because we're embarrassed. I think the reason we don't do it is because we really don't know what we would share, because we were raised in the church and we just kind of always believed these things.
Well, Robert, part of this article is sort of alludes to that, saying that that we've kind of always believed, and if you really want to know, ask this guy.
Yeah, that's right. That's the professional Christian's responsibility. I love the quote in there. Someone said, they believe that the gospel needs to be shared, but somebody else needs to do it, not me. And, that's really sad, because it really is the pivotal point. I mean, I agree with you. C.S. Lewis said it probably better than anybody. He said all of these truths sound like barren platitudes to those that have not had the revelation experience. There is a moment in our lives when God breaks through and becomes real. And for a lot of people, of course, you can't make, one size does not fit all. You really have to pray for discernment and to listen, to be able to know how to share with the person that you're having this encounter with. And Peter probably said it best. He said, sanctify yourself in the Lord. Sanctify God. Be set apart. Recognize that God has set you apart for something special. This is what you do. You are to be an ambassador This is going over to Paul. Paul said, be ambassadors. Be my ambassador. So Peter said, be prepared to give a reason to anyone who asks. That's really important. Be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks for the reason for the hope that is within you with gentleness and respect.
That's precisely the point.
That's it.
You're sharing hope.
Yeah. And so, but you have to prepare yourself for that. And the way you prepare yourself for that is through that sanctification. To know that you are God's ambassador, and that this is who you are, and you have to prepare yourself for that. And so sometimes it'll be, like I said, you have a toolbox, and sometimes you use different tools at different times depending on the circumstance.
But I think there's a lot of people, and this is and that they just don't want to be bothered. They don't want to invest the time that's going to take.
Well, that's that sanctify yourself in the Lord part.
Yeah.
What does that mean? That means that, when something is sanctified, you're set apart.
I mean, a lot of people, again, I'm being facetious, but a lot of people with the waitress had said all of that would say, well, how's the meatloaf?
Yeah, exactly. What are your recommendations?
Yeah, they don't really want to take that time. And they may feel very much akin to even what they're saying. But they don't want to be bothered. They got to go back to work.
Well, there's an interesting piece in this article. Did you notice the part it said that what was it, 3 out of 4 Christians will turn away from a conversation that looks like the party's adversarial.
Would be adversarial.
Yeah, that's exactly what Jesus said would happen. And that's why he said when you go to a house, if you knock on the door and if the peace falls, go on in.
Right.
But if it doesn't go on and go, the point
Shake
for the
dust.
Christian person is not how successful you are in the presentation of the gospel. It's whether you are presenting the gospel,
right?
Whether you're sharing that hope with people, and so if 3 out of 4 doors I come to say I don't want to talk to you about it, I'll move on because I will get to a door that will.
There were the great debates that were going on a few years ago. That one of the Christians had said, "I'm going to back off from this now because I'm not going to convert anybody in this argument."
Yeah, well, no. What you're doing is you're preparing the soil.
Right.
There's a part of that in there. What I do every morning, I try to, is ask for divine appointments. I ask God to bring them by, trusting that He's going to give me the words.
The last words.
The very last word.
Yeah,
yes, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting to see who's really good.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.